If you believe there's still a place in this world for grit, mercy, and the kind of courage that doesn't ask for witnesses, then stick around, friend. Like this story, share it with someone who's got dust in their veins, and subscribe for the next ride into the wild unknown. Now, let me tell you what happened out there before the sun went down and the plains turned red. It started with the wind. It always does. The kind that rolls low and mournful across miles of empty grass, rattling wagon boards and whispering secrets through the sagebrush. I was riding south of the Medicine Bow Trail, chasing rumors of a stolen herd, when I saw her, a small figure staggering through the tall grass, a scrap of calico against an ocean of gold. At first, I thought it was a mirage, the sort that haunts tired men after too many days in the saddle. But then she raised her head, and I saw her eyes. Wide, lost, too old for her years. She couldn't have been more than 8. Dust caked her cheeks, and her braids had come undone, one ribbon torn clean off. Her little hands clutched the reins of a bay pony that looked about ready to collapse. I reined up, heart thudding, and called out, "You all right, missy?" She blinked at me, swayed once, and then the words came, raw, breaking through her sobs like stones skipping across water. My father was left to die on the plains. No preamble, no plea for help, just that, cold and sharp as a knife to the ribs. I was off my horse before I even thought about it, kneeling beside her as she clung to the saddle horn like it was the last solid thing in the world. "Easy now," I said, my voice rough from the trail. "Tell me what happened." Between gasps and tears, I pieced it together. Her name was Lucy Caldwell. Her family had been part of a wagon train headed west, trying to cut through early before the snow caught them in the mountains. But they'd run into a gang near the Red Willow Crossing. Men wearing U.S. coats that didn't belong to them, scouts turned scavengers. They took what they wanted, shot the rest, and rode off with her father still breathing but bleeding bad. Her mother, she didn't say. "I ran," she whispered, eyes glistening under the brim of my hat as I tilted it low to shield her from the sun. "He told me to ride and not look back. Said he'd find me when it was safe. But he didn't come. There are things a man sees out on the frontier that don't sit right with his soul. I'd buried too many friends under too much sky to turn away from another grave waiting to happen." "You did good, Lucy," I told her softly. "Now let's see if we can make good on your pa's word." I lifted her onto my horse. The bay was spent, and wrapped her in my coat. She was shaking, not from cold, but from the kind of fear that sinks deep and stays there. We rode north, back toward where she said it happened, and every mile felt heavier than the last. The plains stretched endless and empty, painted in copper light. Wagon tracks cut through the grass like scars, and vultures circled lazy in the distance. I could smell the smoke before I saw the wreckage. 2 wagons burned to blackened bones, the ground trampled with hoof prints, some fresh, some fading. And there, just beyond the charred frame of a wheel, a single hat, crushed into the dirt. Lucy saw it before I could hide it. She pressed her face into my shoulder and whispered, "That was his." I didn't have the heart to tell her it might not be all that was left. I slid off the saddle and checked the ground. No body. Blood, yes, enough to say he'd fallen, but the tracks told another story. They'd taken him alive, dragged him east toward the canyons. Raiders like that didn't bother burying their dead or tending to their wounded. They wanted ransom, or worse, revenge. "Your father's still breathing, Lucy," I said, hoping the words would hold. "And we're going to bring him back." She looked up at me with the kind of trust that cuts a man deep, the kind that says you're all I've got now. I knew that look. I'd worn it myself once, long ago, before the war and the whiskey. I gathered what supplies I could salvage. A canteen, a torn map, one rifle that hadn't burned. The sun was slipping low, turning the horizon to blood. Somewhere out there, a man was dying slow, and a child's hope was hanging by a thread. When I climbed back into the saddle, Lucy's small hand found my arm. "Will you really go after him?" she asked. "I will," I said, "and I won't come back without him." She didn't smile, but her eyes steadied, and that was enough. The wind carried the scent of rain, the promise of a storm rolling in from the west. I turned my horse toward the canyons, the sky rumbling like an omen, and whispered to no one in particular. If ghosts walk these plains, they'd best make room. I'm coming. By the time dawn broke over the canyons, the trail was clear as sin and twice as cruel. The raiders had been clever. riding in staggered lines to throw off pursuit, but I'd tracked men before. Every broken sage stem, every patch of churned dust told its own story. The prince led east, into a stretch of land that most white men had learned to fear. Apache country. Lucy slept wrapped in my blanket by the fire's dying glow, her face soft in the early light. For the first time since I found her, she wasn't trembling. I took one last look at her before I saddled up. There was something in her stillness that reminded me of a promise I hadn't made out loud, that no matter how far I had to ride, I'd bring her father back. The canyon opened before me like a mouth carved by God himself, deep and unforgiving. I'd ridden there years ago, when I was a younger fool and still believed a man could outrun his past. That's where I met Taza, a leader among the Chiricahua Apache, the kind of man who could stare straight through you and see the truth you were trying to hide. We'd fought side by side once, long before peace had a chance to die in Washington's hands. He owed me his life, though I never planned to cash it in. Until now. By noon, I found their camp hidden in the folds of the red stone cliffs. Smoke rose from the fires, thin and steady, and I could hear the quiet rhythm of drums echoing from somewhere deeper in the valley. When the sentries appeared, silent as ghosts, I raised my hands, palms open. "Tell Taza the ghost of Fort Custer's ride has come back," I said. They took me to him without a word. Time had changed him, streaks of gray through his hair, lines carved deep into his face. But those eyes still held the same quiet fire. He didn't stand when I approached. He just studied me, waiting for me to speak first. "Your men once called me brother," I said. "I come to ask for help, not for war, but for justice." Taza nodded once, his gaze sharp. "Justice for who?" "For a man left to die on the plains," I said. "And for a child who still believes men like me can fix what's been broken." He didn't answer right away. The canyon wind whistled through the stones, carrying the scent of cedar and ash. Finally, he said, "The white man's justice is a crooked path. Why should we walk it again?" "Because this ain't about white men," I said, stepping closer. "It's about honor. Those raiders, they wear stolen coats, stolen names, and they bring shame to every man who ever fought to protect what was right. I can't stop them alone, but together, maybe we can." Something flickered in Taza's eyes, memory, perhaps, of a night when we'd both bled under the same moon. He rose slowly, the motion deliberate, the weight of leadership in every breath. "You speak like a man who has buried his share of ghosts." "I have," I said, "but I'm not ready to bury another." He turned to the men gathered nearby, said something in Apache I couldn't catch, and the air shifted. They moved like wind through grass, efficient, silent, ready. When he looked back at me, there was a faint smile beneath his war paint. "You still ride with death, my friend. This time, he rides behind 400 of my best." The words hit me like thunder. 400 Apache braves. Warriors who had no reason to follow me except the word of a man who once shared his fire with an outcast soldier. I felt something stir in my chest, something I hadn't known in years. Hope, maybe, or the ghost of it. We rode before sundown. The canyon filled with the sound of drums, horses, and the low chant of warriors preparing for war. The sky turned to fire, all gold and crimson, and the wind carried the promise of reckoning. By the time we reached the edge of the plains, the raiders' camp flickered in the distance like a fever dream. Smoke rose from their fires. They had no idea the storm that was coming for them. Taza rode up beside me, his face painted with the red clay of his people. "When the sun touches the hills," he said, "we strike." I nodded, tightening my grip on the reins. My heart beat steady, not from fear, but from knowing the balance was about to shift. Somewhere in that camp was Colonel Henry Caldwell, half dead, maybe worse, and I'd be damned before I let his daughter's last prayer go unanswered. As the sun dipped low, the world seemed to hold its breath. The drums stopped. The riders fanned out, 400 strong, shadows against the burning horizon. And when Taza raised his spear to the sky, the cry that rose from the canyon shook the earth itself. The plains, quiet no more, came alive with the sound of vengeance. Dawn broke like a blade through smoke. The raiders' camp still slept, their fires low and careless, never guessing death was already saddled and waiting on the ridge. 400 Apache braves sat in silence behind Taza, their faces painted with the red of the rising sun. When his hand lifted, The world seemed to hold its breath, then shattered. The war cry rose like thunder, and the riders poured down the slope like the storm itself. Gunfire cracked. Dust boiled. Men screamed. The raiders scrambled for weapons, but it was too late. The Apache moved like ghosts, striking fast, vanishing faster. I rode beside Taza, wind and gun smoke in my face, heart pounding with the grim purpose of a man who's got one thing left to live for. I saw the tent near the center, canvas half collapsed, blood on the ground, and I knew that's where Caldwell was. I slid from the saddle, pushed through the chaos, and found him there, bound and broken but breathing. "Colonel Henry Caldwell," I said, cutting the ropes. "Your girl sent me." His cracked lips twitched. "Lucy, she's alive?" "She's waiting, sir. But we need to move." He was weak, but the fire in his eyes hadn't gone out. I hauled him up, half carrying him through the smoke. A bullet tore through the air and caught my sleeve, but the pain barely registered. Behind us, the Apache thundered through the camp, the battle already turning. Taza's men didn't fight for vengeance. They fought for balance, for justice. And by the time the sun broke fully over the ridge, the raiders were finished. Taza rode up to me as I lifted Caldwell into the saddle. "He lives," he said, nodding once. "He does," I replied. "Because of you." He gave me a rare smile. "You once fought beside me when others would not. The debt is paid." Then he turned and led his warriors back toward the canyons, their silhouettes melting into the morning mist until only the echo of hooves remained. I rode slow toward the west, the colonel swaying but alive in front of me. The plains stretched endless and gold again, scrub brushed clean by blood and sunlight. When we reached Lucy's camp at dusk, she saw us from afar and ran, barefoot, wild, crying her father's name. He slid from the saddle and caught her in his arms, voice breaking as he whispered, "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here." I looked away, because some reunions don't need witnesses. When I turned back, Lucy was staring at me, tears shining like glass. "Mr. Ward, will you stay?" I wanted to tell her yes, that the fighting was done, that men like me could learn to rest. But I'd never been good at lying to children. I reached down, brushed her cheek with my gloved hand, and said softly, "Not this time, darling. Your pa needs you more than I do. But if the wind ever calls my name, you'll know I kept my promise." I tipped my hat and rode east into the gathering dark. Behind me, father and daughter stood framed by the firelight, small against the wide prairie. The wind carried her laughter faint and far, proof that even out here, in a land of dust and loss, something pure could still survive. They say the plains remember every soul that's crossed them. Maybe they do. Maybe that's why, when the night is quiet and the stars burn low, I still hear that little girl's voice calling through the wind. "He came back."